Hi everyone, it's Laura here, and in today's video I'm going to share with you how to create an ocean scene card using stamps by Heffy Doodle and Distress Embossing Glazes. I started by creating my background and I die cut some Bristol Smooth cardstock using the Stitched Hearts background die by Heffy Doodle. This way I immediately create some interest on the background and I'm going to build on this using Distress Oxides and Distress Embossing Glazes. I'm working on a craft mat right here because I want to use the ink smooshing technique, and working on a craft mat rather than a glass mat directly is going to allow your inks to bead up and you will get more texture this way. I smooshed Distress Oxides in Peacock feathers and cracked pistachio on the craft mat. I activated the inks with some water and then I pressed the paper onto the inks to start adding some color and some texture really quickly to my background. I'm going to repeat the process, drying between layers, as this maximizes the amount of texture you get because the inks will not blend so much with each other, and then I'm going to bring in some tumbled glass and some blueprint sketch to add a little bit more depth in terms of color to my background. I am not adding a lot of color at this stage because I want the main colors on my background to be cracked pistachio and peacock feathers. I then added even more texture to my background by creating some droplets with my Distress Oxides in cracked pistachio and peacock feathers again. I smooshed the inks on my glass mat, I activated them with water, and then I used a rather large brush to create some droplets. I'm adding one more layer of depth to the background using the Stormy Stencil by Heffy Doodle. I'm working on my Ranger Make Art Station. This is a magnetic surface that you can use to hold your stencils in place, and I have been loving using it. I'm blending cracked pistachio Distress Oxide here, and I'm using the different wave patterns in the stencils to create interest on the background. And by the way, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to let me know with a comment in the comment section down below and to give the video a thumbs up. It helps my channel a lot and it helps me know what you actually like in terms of content on this channel. At this point, I decided to use my Distress Embossing Glazes to add even more interest and more elements to this background. I was just having fun and I kept going and going. I'm using the wave stamps in the Otter side stamp set by Heffy Doodle, and I'm stamping them all over the panel with some clear embossing ink. This one here is by Wow. I also used my anti-static powder tool on the whole background to make sure that the embossing powders or embossing glazes would only stick to the stamped images, and then I coated the images with Distress Embossing Glaze in the color Broken China, and I melted the embossing glaze with my heat tool. I repeated the same steps, and this time I'm using cracked pistachio embossing glaze. So these embossing glazes are tinted, but they are also a little bit translucent, so they will add color, but they will react differently, so the yield of the color will be a little bit different on different colored backgrounds. They are really fun to use and I can't wait to experiment with them more. I wanted to lighten up the background a little bit at this stage, so I spritzed it with some water from a distress sprayer. I let the water activate the inks a little bit and then I dried the excess with a paper towel. I decided to add some more white splatters, again to lighten up the whole look, so I diluted some acrylic paint directly on my glass mat, picked it up with a paintbrush and then created a lot of droplets on the background. I then decided that I wanted a frame for my design, so I die cut some Heffy Doodle heavyweight white cardstock using dies in the Clover frame set. There is a rectangle die that I used to die cut the panel and add the stitched detail all around, and then for the inside opening I used this die here in the same set. The initial idea was to glue the frame directly on top of my background panel, but then I decided that I wanted this ocean background to be actually raised with respect to the level of the card, so what I did is I used that Clover frame die to cut the background, and then I'm going to show you later on how I will layer everything. But for now, I'm going to move on and start working on my images. I used this adorable Oceans of Love stamp set by Heffy Doodle, and I'm going to do some coloring with alcohol markers. I'm using Spectrum Noir Illustrator alcohol markers today. I have some Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock laid down in my Misty here, and I'm stamping the images using alcohol-proof black ink by Spectrum Noir, as this will not smudge when I use alcohol markers with it. I kept the coloring relatively simple today, and I'm using 3 to 4 markers per shade in order to add some dimension to the images. I'm not paying too much attention to light sources in the sense that for each image I just picked a side. I decided that that was going to be in shadow, and I added my darker markers there, and then I blended everything towards the opposite side with progressively lighter markers. As you probably noticed, I have stamped all the images twice except for the shark that I have stamped just once, and this is because I always prefer to have more images and maybe add the extra ones to the inside of the card or use them for a future project rather than finding myself at the end of the card making process and realizing that I needed extra images and then I have to go back and stamp and color and die cut again. Also, don't worry, you will not have to watch me color each and every image that you see here. I will show every image just once so that you can see what markers I used and how I colored the images. And also all the markers are listed in the blog post that you will find linked in the description box down below in case you want to use that as a reference. I will be soon speeding up the coloring process a little bit and adding some music so that you can enjoy watching me color, hopefully, or I will also write on screen the minute at which you can skip to in case you prefer to just jump ahead and see how I finished up the card. But one thing I wanted to draw your attention to, and you will see me do that in a little bit, is that in order to add more interest and texture to the images, I added some dots just around the shadow areas and rather sparingly, and this makes the texture of the skin look a little bit less smooth. This is what I was talking about, and now it's time to leave you with a little bit of music, and I'll catch you guys soon. Alright, so at this point all the images are colored in and I can go ahead and die cut them using the coordinating dies to the Oceans of Love stamp set by Heffy Doodle. I'm using Heffy Doodle memo tape to secure the dies in place, and I really like this tape both for masking and for holding my dies because it's tacky enough for the dies not to shift when you run everything through your die cutting machine, but also it does not tear your paper at all. I created my card base out of some more Heffy Doodle heavyweight white cardstock. I cut it to 4 1/4 by 11 inches and I am scoring it at 5.5 inches so that I have a top folding A2 card base. At this point I coated the card base with some strong double-sided adhesive. I peeled off the back and then I'm using the corner of my mini score tool. You can also use your stamping tool to do this, so that I'm sure that I get the perfect alignment between my card base and this framed panel. I have the central die cut there out of white cardstock that I am layering with my background, so that this way the background is actually raised by the thickness of the cardstock itself compared to the card base level. I hope that made sense. I'm nesting the ocean background die cut on my frame, and then I can move on and work on the sentiment. I used stamps in the Oceans of Love stamp set, and here I am stamping the greetings "Sending You" and "Of Love" using some black ink on a scrap piece of white cardstock. I'm going to trim some small rectangles around these sentiments, and then I'm using the Strips of Ease dies by Heffy Doodle to die cut some thin banners. The die set comes with 3 dies in 3 different sizes, so that you can basically match the size of your banners to the size of your sentiments, and they work great with all the sentiment stamps in the Heffy Doodle range. Here, because I want just a very thin banner, I am running everything through my die cutting machine twice so that I can cut on both sides of my sentiment, and I did that to create also a second sentiment banner around the greeting "Sending You." The next part of the sentiment is this scripty word "ocean" that I decided to emboss with my Distress Embossing Glaze in the color Broken China to match the elements that I have in the background. Here is the way the sentiment looks when the embossing powder is melted, and I just wanted to show you that the yield in terms of color is different based on whether we have our Distress Oxides in the background or just white cardstock. It's a little bit difficult, I guess, to see the difference on camera, but you can absolutely tell it in real life, and I really want to experiment with these products a little bit more because I think they're a lot of fun. I created my scene by adhering the images, scattering them throughout my ocean background, and then I'm going to adhere the sentiment on the bottom right corner of the card front. I'm using Nuvo Deluxe adhesive, so I'm gluing everything flat to my card base, and my reverse tweezers that are always very helpful when it comes to adhering and picking out die cuts. I had leftover images from my coloring, and so I decided to decorate the inside of the card too. I stamped another of the greetings from the Oceans of Love stamp set using black ink, and then I picked 3 of the images and I adhered them inside my card. That turtle is left out, poor thing, but I'll use it on a future card, I'm sure. It is now time to add some finishing touches to the card. I'm using a Sakura No. 8 Jelly Roll pen to add some highlights as well as some dots around the areas where I imagine the cheeks would be, as I feel that this adds an extra touch of cuteness to these already very adorable images. I used some iridescent bubbles by Studio Katia in different sizes around the sentiment, and then I wanted to emphasize some of those white droplets that I had created with my acrylic paint, so I just went over them with a white gel pen to fill in visually the space in the center of my design. Here is the finished card. I think it's really cute, and I had a lot of fun creating that ocean background with all those different techniques. They're all pretty simple, but the result, I think, has a lot of interest to it. As always, if you did enjoy the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, let me know in the comment section down below, and if you haven't already, you can subscribe to my channel for more card making and paper crafting inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by, stay safe and healthy, and have a great day!